You're listening to Protecting What Matters by the Ohio Department of Commerce. Commerce is Ohio's chief regulator, and we play a vital role in keeping you safe by protecting your property, your money, and some of the products you use every day. This is designed to bring awareness to important issues and help educate consumers and businesses. Join us as we chat with trusted industry experts focused on providing you with the tools you need to help you protect what matters most in your life.
Minimum wage is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand. But for our perspective in Wage and Hour, we want to make sure the minimum wage is paid, minors are taken care of, overtime is being paid correctly, and they've got all the notices and posters available.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Protecting What Matters. The new year is right around the corner, and with the new year comes a new minimum wage in Ohio. I'm Jared Clay, Public Information Officer for the Department of Commerce's Division of Industrial Compliance. And joining me today is Steve Clegg, Chief of the Division's Bureau of Wage and Hour. And today we're going to fill you in on everything you need to know about the new minimum wage, how it's set, how it's enforced, and a lot more. Steve, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Jared.
So to start things off, if you haven't heard by now, a constitutional amendment brings to light this new minimum wage every year. So on January 1st, 2024, it's hard to believe we're already talking about 2024, but yeah, January 1st, 2024, the state's minimum wage will increase for both non-tipped and tipped employees, right?
Yeah, Jared. So for non-tipped employees, the minimum wage will be $10.45 an hour. For tipped employees, it'll be $5.25 an hour. And with the tipped employees, the idea is that the tips that they receive for their normal work makes up the difference because every employee in the state of Ohio is required to be paid at least the minimum wage, which is $10.45 an hour as of January 1st, 2024. So what we're looking at is getting that message out, making sure businesses know that they need to change that over, and making sure that employees know that that change needs to happen too, so that if there is any issues, the employees can let us know.
And just for reference, the 2023 minimum wage, that was $10.10 an hour for the non-tipped employees and $5.05 for the tipped employees.
That's correct.
So there's a lot of workers across the state who are minimum wage workers, but that new minimum wage may not be the case for all of them. So the new increase will apply to employees of businesses, the way the statute reads, with annual gross receipts, of more than $385,000.
That's correct.
Some people may think that's a lot to take in. What, in layman's terms, what does that mean?
Sure. So what the goal of that is to basically try to scale which businesses have to pay the state minimum wage versus the federal minimum wage. We want to make sure that the small local mom and pop store is able to pay their employees correctly. And if they do not meet that level of gross receipts, so if their income through sales, donation for nonprofits, if their gross receipts do not equal the $385,000, they only have to pay the federal minimum wage, which is currently $7.25. So again, that goal is to kind of make sure that the minimum wage, the state level minimum wage, is being paid by businesses who have large enough volume, large enough income to support that level of wage.
So along with those small businesses that will have the federal minimum wage, that wage will also applies to 14 and 15-year-olds who
That's
work, right?
correct. That's correct. So 14 and 15-year-olds need only be paid the $7.25 federal minimum wage. 16 and 17-year-olds, minors, they're allowed to work also with a work permit. Those minors have to be paid the state minimum wage, not the federal minimum wage.
And for those, the 14, 15-year-olds, that's regardless of if they're working for a big $385,000 or a small business, right?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
There's no threshold on that. It's just the age that sets which minimum wage applies to which minor.
And you mentioned the minor work permits. We've talked about this on a previous episode. If you haven't listened to that episode, what are you doing? No, just go back and listen to it. There's a lot of good information. For parents, there's a lot of good information. But just to quickly touch on that, the work permits that are required.
Sure. So anyone under the age of 18, so between the ages of 14 and 17, your minor will need a work permit in order to work legally in the state of Ohio. It's a pretty simple process. It's paperwork that the employee, so the minor, the employer, and the parents all fill out, submit it to the school district. school district makes the decision as to whether the child is, progressing academically and behaviorally to the point that they're okay with them having a job outside work, and school issues the work permit and the kid can get to work. So.
And that's timely. When we first talked about it, it was for summer jobs, but
Right.
holiday jobs, it all applies
Absolutely.
the same. And you can find those permits and applications on our website. That's com.ohio.gov/DICO. So with the small businesses, 14, 15-year-olds under the federal minimum wage, not the state minimum wage, are there any other exceptions that would?
Yeah, so there are a few, and some of them are a little complicated, so I don't want to get too far down in the weeds, but things like seasonal employment. So there's a gross receipts during a certain number of months for that test, where if a business makes money for 4 months out of the year, and then the other 8 months they're just operating without really bringing in income, they can be exempt from minimum wage and overtime. There's also some exemptions that are kind of run of the mill, people that are employed around the household of the employer. So that would take like maids, babysitters, live-ins, those kind of things. But then there are some minimum wage exemptions that are in the Fair Labor Standards Act, which we pull those exemptions in, and they can get a little bit tricky. So if you have any questions, if someone would look for those exemptions are on our minimum wage poster, which should be posted in every business. And also, anyone can always feel free to reach out to us. We can help them understand those exemptions a little bit more, make sure they're compliant with the law.
And you touched on the posters. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. So stay tuned, because we're going to take a quick break. And on the other side, we're going to discuss more about the state's minimum wage and how it's set.
Thanks for listening to Protecting What Matters from the Ohio Department of Commerce. We are your resource for all safety information for your home or business. Here's a quick safety message reminder from the Ohio State Fire Marshal's Office.
So smoke alarms, we want to make sure we're putting those on each level of the house. Each bedroom that you're at, where anybody sleeps, put that inside that bedroom, and then outside where the people sleep. They're important because what you typically have is that early activation, early notification of something happening, in this case smoke building up, and that usually is what tells you that there's a fire happening. So having those placed in those locations that are appropriate, making sure that you're checking the alarms themselves about once a month just to make sure that they're working. Change the batteries on them, we like to say twice a year right now. And then after 10 years, those entire alarms are going to need replaced.
For more information on the State Fire Marshal, visit our website at com.ohio.gov/fire. And be sure to check out some of our previous podcast episodes on all podcast platforms.
Thanks for listening to Protecting What Matters. I'm Jared Clay, Public Information Officer for the Division of Industrial Compliance, and I'm speaking today with Bureau of Wage and Hour Chief Steve Clegg about the state's new minimum wage. As a reminder, on January 1st, 2024, the state's minimum wage will increase to $10.45 an hour for non-tipped employees and $5.25 per hour for tipped employees. Now, Steve, a common question we get, and many people wonder how the state determines the minimum wage. Can you talk a little bit about how that's determined year to year?
Sure. So the minimum wage is increased according to a measure of inflation that the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the United States Department of Labor, puts out. The specific one is the Consumer Price Index for urban wage and city workers. It takes a lot of factors into account when it looks at inflation, regular everyday costs, but also regional impacts, different things. So that was set through a constitutional amendment that was tied to that. So we simply look at the current minimum wage, take the percent change over the last year for that CPI number, that Consumer Price Index number, and apply that to the minimum wage. I would love to tell you it's some really, really tough algorithmic math, but it's not. It's pretty simple. Anyone can look at those numbers. Those are not, inside baseball secrets. Those are available on the Bureau of Labor Statistics website. So for planning purposes, if a business wants to be proactive, usually September is the time we have to look at it. So they can start planning in August. There's not going to be huge changes, a month out, and they can start planning for what the minimum wage will be the upcoming year.
Yeah, like you said, it's available. People can look it up
Correct.
at any time. I think sometimes people think there's someone or a small group of people behind a closed door setting this.
Well, we used to have a dartboard that we just throw but no. This has been the way since 2006. This has been the way that it's been adjusted.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 2006. It was the voters who
That's
who
correct.
decided.
Yeah, so it was via referendum. Much like what we just went through this past November, it was a constitutional amendment. So like issue 1 was, and we've had other, there was, I think, issue 2 a few years ago. So it's a familiar process for most people in the state. But in 2006, it was issue 1 in 2006 was to set the minimum wage according to this CPI. It also included an automatic escalator the first year. So it basically was it brought it up to $7.25, I believe. 2006, I was not involved in this, but I think it brought it to $7.25, which was the federal minimum wage. And then since that time, it has been adjusted according to that CPI every January 1st. So we're going on. So this is the 17th adjustment, I believe.
Yeah, hard to
Or
believe.
17th.
Yeah.
Because the first year it didn't adjust. The first year it just went up. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned the federal minimum wage. That's a perfect segue for what I wanted to talk about next. So that's that 725 mark for small businesses or teens, and you mentioned some other exceptions for that too. That rate hasn't changed in a while,
No.
and it's completely out of the state's control. It's all federal. Let's talk about that process a little bit if it were to change.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, so similar to a lot of things in Ohio, the way that would need to change on the federal level would be an act of Congress. So they would have to pass legislation. I don't claim to be an expert on how congressional, processes pass, but it would take action from the United States Congress in order to raise that minimum wage. Now, there has been, especially over the last 8 to 10 years, there have been what you see in the news as increases in federal minimum wage, and what those are for employees of the federal government or contractors that are working for the federal government. So you've seen those different things. You see the push for $15 an hour on the federal level, and sometimes it's a little misleading when someone sees that on the news and says, "Well, that says it's $15 an hour now." Well, that is if you are a federal employee. So that's probably a good thing to point out.
Yeah,
we get those questions, and again, it can be a little confusing.
Sure.
What applies when? What do I do as a business owner? What do I look for as an employee? So the more we can do to keep those things straight, the better we are.
Yeah. So for employees, January 1st comes, the new rates go into effect. What's next for them, or I guess what should they expect? Is it in effect immediately the next pay period? If they have a pay period that's split,
So
will they have both?
We get this question every year.
Yeah.
Hey, I work New Year's Eve, and I start at 8. And I work midnight. I work third shift. So at what point does the minimum wage kick in? It's never really been laid out as far as this is when the clock flips over and hits midnight. What we have always given the advice of from our legal counsel and then pass it on to business owners is that first pay period at the first of the year. It's easiest bookkeeping wise to just go ahead and make that when the change happens. I think January 1st this year is on a Tuesday or Wednesday. So it is going to fall like right in the middle of a pay period. So if your pay period runs from Saturday through Sunday, then that Saturday, even though the new minimum wage may not be enacted yet, the best advice is for the businesses to go ahead, flip over, start it. And we've seen over the years, because again, we get the question, but we've seen that's the way most businesses handle it. Be proactive about it. You're going to have to do it anyway. But that first pay period, is whenever January 1st lands, that's when that hits. So,
and sticking on the business's side, the business owner's side, the obvious thing is increase the pay. But do they have any other additional responsibilities with this? You talked about the posters.
Yeah, so the posters are a requirement. Minor work permits, or if there's minors working there, that's a requirement. Minimum wage and then overtime. I mean, there are overtime. Again, anytime after 40 hours in one pay period is required to be paid at time and a half. Most people understand how overtime works, but a lot of people get confused because of local policies. So employer-specific policies where if you work more than 8 hours in a day, you get overtime. Well, that's not state mandated overtime. That is a private or public, or excuse me, a local decision by the employer. And they're allowed to do that. As long as they comply with our law, they can make those individual rules for their own employees however they want. So we do get overtime questions too, and it really those are the big issues for employers to make sure they're doing from our perspective. Obviously, there's workers' comp. There's you go through the whole list, but for our perspective in wage and hour, we want to make sure the minimum wage is paid, minors are taken care of, overtime's being paid correctly, and they've got all the notices and posters available.
And you mentioned these posters are required. So if you're a business owner listening and you don't have them, you can find and download the 2024 minimum wage poster on our website. Just head to com.ohio.gov/DICO. On the left-hand side of the page, you'll see wage and hour. Just click that, and there you're going to be able to find the link to download that. Again, that site is com.ohio.gov/DICO.
And one point I want to make there before we move on, you should never have to pay as an employer. You never have to pay for those posters. If you get something in the mail, and I say this because our bureau just got this letter in the mail. So there are companies who will put all of our posters on one sheet. They'll put the federal posters also. They'll put the workers' comp, the jobs and family services posters all together on one laminated sheet. And they send you, as a business owner, they send you a letter that says you're required to have these posters. And then they charge you $100. Now, their claim, and it's not illegal. What they do is not illegal because they are providing it in a way that they can charge for it. But the way it's presented and the way it looks is that it came from us. They're very creative with how they do that. Again, we just got one in the mail. So we opened it. My employees looked at it. They said, well, this is funny. This is what we always hear about when these businesses call us. So keep in mind, if you're an employer, every poster that's required, either on the federal level or the state level, they're available for free. There is one kind of bank of all of the posters that Jobs and Family Services does maintain. If you would like to get that instead of just our poster, if you need your other posters, if you reach out to us, we'll get you the link to that Jobs and Family Services site.
And with that, we're going to take one more quick break. On the other side, we're going to tell you how the Bureau of Wage and Hour enforces the state's minimum wage. It's your money. Come and claim it. The Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Unclaimed Funds is currently safeguarding more than $3 billion in unclaimed funds. So there's a good chance you or someone you know has money waiting to be claimed. Just head over to our website, unclaimedfunds.ohio.gov, to search your name, the name of a family member, or a loved one to see if you have an unclaimed fund. Welcome back to Protecting What Matters. I'm Jared Clay, and joining me is the Bureau Chief of the Division of Industrial Compliance's Bureau of Wage and Hour, Steve Kleck. Steve, we've been talking about the state's new minimum wage that goes up on January 1st, 2024. But regardless of what the minimum wage is or how many times it goes up or how much it goes up, one of the Bureau's biggest duties is enforcing it. You've told me before that one of the most important things the Bureau does is making sure people are paid what they're due.
That's correct.
Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like on your end and how the Bureau does that and make sure they get what they're owed?
Sure. So we are, on top of being the people who set the minimum wage and who monitor those things, are like you mentioned, our biggest role is the enforcement of minimum wage. If you are, as an employee, underpaid, if you haven't got paid, one of the biggest things we see is a last paycheck that doesn't get paid. When that happens, or if that should happen to you, don't panic. Just reach out to us. Our complaint forms are on our website. They are electronically fileable. So that just happened last year. We started to take complaints online. It's a decently long process, just so everyone understands. It is not, but there's a purpose for that. We take as much information as we can up front so that we can take as action as quickly as we can once we get the complaint. The more info you're able to provide us, the better it is for us to be able to take action, to be able to move quickly. But really, if you are an employee and you have not been paid correctly, you just need to go file a complaint with us. You can call, we can walk you through it, we can help you understand if the complaint is valid or not, because there are parameters, there are limitations to what we're allowed to take as far as a complaint. There has to be, you have to be required to be paid minimum wage. We talked about exemptions earlier. You have to have evidence. So encourage any employee who thinks that maybe they're getting shorted or they're not going to get paid at some point to keep records themselves. Even if it's simply once you get in your car in the evening, write down the hours you worked. That's something we can use. And the more we have to use, the better we can help. But ultimately, our goal is to make sure that if you were supposed to be paid, if you worked in the state of Ohio and you weren't paid, we are here to help you get paid. As a result of our complaint process, if we find that you are owed money, we can get the minimum wage rate. So if you were making $20 an hour, we can't get $20 an hour. We can get the $10.45 as of January 1st. But we can also get 2 times that amount in damages. So quick math tells me that's $20.90 an hour on top of the $10.45. So if you were getting paid more than minimum wage, don't be discouraged in filing a complaint and saying, well, they're only going to get the minimum wage. We can sometimes get that up further. Also, if it's a last paycheck, what we do then is our first attempt is to collect what you were actually owed. So if your last paycheck was for $20 an hour, we're going to say you owe them the $20 an hour and try to get it done that way so that you get the money you were actually supposed to get paid.
And you talk about that process. Earlier, we talked about there are some exceptions. There are some
Correct.
folks who are making the federal minimum wage. Does that still say they have a complaint?
Yeah, so anyone that is subject to the federal minimum wage would need to file a complaint with the United States Department of Labor. We can enforce the federal minimum wage, but it's tricky how we have to do it. It's a more complex process. It's a longer process. Again, one of our goals is to be efficient and quick, because if you're not getting paid, you probably need the money. And, the faster we can get that turned around. Currently, our minimum wage complaints take between 4 and 6 weeks. One common misconception is that we have a giant pool of money that we can just hand out when you don't get paid. Unfortunately, they have not made me officially Santa Claus with that yet. So I do not have that, but we do move as quick as we can. And the federal government will do the same thing. The United States Department of Labor they actually take your complaint over the phone. And then they go through the same process we do, demanding the pay, going through collecting the pay and then paying it back to you. I can't speak to how long they take because that's not my role. I can't tell you, like most other things, we're faster than them. But again, if you're subject to that federal minimum wage, your best bet is to go through them. Yeah.
And you've mentioned the time frame a few times, and it's probably hard to tell people what that time frame is, just because no 2 cases are probably the same.
That's
right?
exactly right. I mean, if we've got a simple last paycheck case, and if we have good information for contact information for the employer, if we have good information that came from the employee, there are times we can get that turned around in a week, 2 weeks. But and that's one employee. If there are 50 employees and we have to look at 6 months worth of records, that's just by its nature going to take us a little bit longer. So 4 to 6 weeks is our average. And obviously, when you look at an average, there's some that are shorter, there's some that are longer. So, the more complex the case is, the more detailed it takes us, the longer amount of time it takes.
It's an average for a reason. So if you're someone who is looking to file a complaint, you can do so like Steve said on our website. Again, that's com.ohio.gov/DICO. You'll click that same wage and hour link on the left-hand side of the screen, and then you're going to see a link that just says file a minimum wage complaint, and you'll just follow those steps. For someone who's doing that, what can they expect to need to provide?
So again, they want to, any evidence is good evidence. So if you've got, we get a lot of screenshots of text messages. Hey, I send my time in via text. That's fine. Again, as simple as sitting down and writing down what days you worked. We get a lot of pictures of desk calendars where someone writes, on each day that I work 3 to 8, and that's fine too. I mean, and if you are a detailed oriented person and you want to have some kind of Excel spreadsheet that keeps your hours, that's fine too. But anything you can provide as an employee, we're willing to take. Now they, don't try to make the decision for us as to whether it's good evidence or not. That's what my investigators are for. They're good at their jobs. Give us what you have. We'll take it from there. Once you submit the complaint, you'll be contacted from us via mail. That usually within a week after we receive it, you'll know whether your case was accepted and what we need secondary steps from you. If it is a more complex, longer time frame than just a last paycheck, we're going to send you an interview form. Fill that out the best you can, get it back to us, and we'll get started on it.
Well, Steve, I appreciate you joining me today. I feel like we've covered a lot of really good information with the new minimum wage and what's happening after that. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you feel
I don't
like
think
is
so.
important?
I really think minimum wage is one of the things that a lot of people don't understand. We do provide training for employers. If an employer is listening and they'd like to learn more about how the minimum wage works, they just reach out to us. There's a form on our website. They can reach out to us and ask, and we would be glad. We'll most likely provide virtual training through myself, one of my investigators. We can spend time with that employer. But it is one of the things that I think, everyone understands it and no one understands it at the same time, And so the more we can do like this, the better off we are.
Well, just one more time as we start to wrap things up on this episode. Ohio's minimum wage is going to be going up on January 1st, 2024. That increase is going to be to $10.45 an hour for non-tipped employees and $5.25 for tipped employees. And as that rate goes up, the Department of Commerce's Bureau of Wage and Hour is going to be there to make sure the state's employees are paid for the hours that they have worked. And whether you're an employee or a business owner, you can find all kinds of valuable information, forms, resources on our website. That's com.ohio.gov/DICO. And then you just click on Wage and Hour on the left-hand side of the page. Thanks for listening.